As a bloody war is waged in Yemen, a power vacuum developing in the wake of aerial bombardment and ground invasion is being filled by well-established terrorist organisations. Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, known as AQAP, and the so-called Islamic State both seem set to benefit from the battle between a Saudi coalition backed by the West and the Houthi movement allied to Iran. Gabriel Gatehouse, along with our team of Warwick Harrington, Nawal Al-Maghafi and Jack Garland, have spent the last week in Yemen. This is their latest report, and you may find some of the images disturbing.
No one is winning in Yemen, except perhaps Al-Qaeda, and now a newly emerging Islamic State. Last Wednesday, shopkeepers, electricians and ice sellers gathered in the mosque for evening prayers in this working-class neighbourhood. Then came the explosions.
قمت بعد الانفجار اشوف ان الجثث يعني حولي والذي كانوا حتى المسعفين والذي كان اسعفنا قد واحد منهم يعني يقول اشلاء مقطعه في جنب السياره.
The first blast was a suicide bombing inside the mosque itself. The second bomb was hidden in a car outside. It was timed to detonate just as people came to help. The following morning, with blood stains still fresh on the streets, children gathered round a plastic bag containing the remains of what was once someone's head. The bombing was carried out by the group that calls itself Islamic State in Yemen. The survivors wanted us to see inside the mosque. This country has long been on the front line of the battle with Al-Qaeda, but Islamic State is new here.
Easy.
Yeah, you can still smell it.
And see the clothes and the blood and
Bits of charred clothing and other personal belongings lie scattered amid the debris and the prayer books. In a country divided by war, this attack seemed calculated to deepen the sectarian rift.
أنا الحمد لله كنت أنا في هذا المنطقة في هذا المكان أنا موجود كنت أنا في هذا البقعة تماما. عند ناس عندما اقتلبوا قلت يمكن معلش على أساس الركام لا ينطل ولا يعقب صاروخ ثاني.
The bomber had sat near the front of the congregation, his vest packed with ball bearings. This charred bit of carpet seems to be the epicenter of the blast. This must have been where the suicide bomber was sitting, because you can see all of the shrapnel marks flowing outwards along the carpet, up the pillars, up the walls, all the way up to the ceiling. At least 20 people were killed. This city is on edge, not least because of the additional threat of airstrikes. Everyone's pointing up because there's an aeroplane in the sky. A coalition led by the Saudi Air Force has been pounding Yemen for months in an attempt to retake the country from Houthi rebel control. They've had some success in the south, but as they advance, Al-Qaeda and Islamic State are exploiting the vacuum, and that is worrying the UN.
We are very concerned because we see already that Al-Qaeda, AQAP, in the Arabian Peninsula was always a force in the south, and we've seen now again, particularly in southern Yemen, where the coalition-supported legitimate government has taken back the city of Aden and all the southern governorates.
As different militias clash, we've heard reports of AQAP picking up weapons dropped for the anti-Houthi alliance. Sources in Aden told us some of the more extreme members are thought to have split off to form Islamic State in Yemen. Both groups thrive in a state of lawlessness.
By ousting the Al-Houthi, what now we see is a serious breakdown of law and order, where many militias who were fighting together against the common enemy, now that the common enemy has been ousted, now they start fighting against each other. That is and Al-Qaeda is one of the important actors here.
For years, Western policy here has been to take the fight to AQAP inside its Yemeni fortress. The United States has operated an extensive drone program targeting its senior leadership. Yemen's military has received support and weapons to contain the group. But this new conflict has shifted the focus away from AQAP, which is considered Al-Qaeda's most dangerous franchise. In this context, Britain and America's support for the Saudi-led campaign here seems contradictory, even perverse. AQAP's avowed aim is to carry out attacks on the West, and it seems fair to assume that those members who've moved on to Islamic State will have similar priorities, and the war here seems to be advancing their cause. In the mosque in Sana'a, Hashim Sharif was lucky to escape with his life when the bomb went off just meters away. Explosions are a part of everyday life here now, whether from suicide bombings or from airstrikes. But in the minds of many, the perpetrators are becoming one and the same.
المال السعودي والأمريكي والسلاح الأمريكي هذا الذي بيحصلهم منهم. فعلبها ناس مجرمين يعني لا يخافوا الله ولا رسوله.
In an increasingly complex Middle East, the old boundaries are becoming blurred. In supporting its ally, Saudi Arabia, the West now risks also strengthening its foe.
That was Gabriel Gatehouse on Yemen's possible future. His report last night focused very much on the country's present. Most notably, the carnage wrought by Saudi bombs apparently dropped on civilian areas, and troubling questions about whether weaponry supplied by Britain could have been deployed in possible war crimes. We filmed the aftermath of one attack on this bottling plant.
The owner showed us a list of who was working that night. More than half were killed, 13 in total, including Ahmed and his brother. The Saudis say this was a weapons factory and a training camp for African mercenaries. We saw absolutely no evidence of that.
Schools and hospitals and markets and enterprises and factories should not be stricken, should not be shelled. You know, even in warfare there are certain rules to abide with, and they are being violated in this conflict.
Brigadier General Ahmed Asiri of the Saudi-led coalition joins me now from Riyadh. Good evening, General. Fairly worrying reports there of a bottling plant targeted by your forces after intelligence apparently determined that it was some form of training camp and munitions factory. What's your response?
Good evening to you and to your audience. I think I already commented. If you are talking about the operation where in Hajjah, we talked about it at that time that we have at that time operation in this area, but not in the civilian or in inside the city. We have an operation against one camp where the Houthis militias train their fighters, and it is.
Forgive me, General, the bottling plant that we just saw the footage of, Saudi intelligence had apparently determined that it was being used as a training camp for African jihadists and that it was some sort of weapons factory. Our reporter was there with a camera and a crew and found absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. So either the intelligence was wrong or something even more sinister is unfolding.
I don't know if we are talking about the same position, because we did not publish the position that we are talking about it.
Let me be clear. A bottling plant staffed by civilians was blown up by a Saudi-led air attack. Do we know why?
If you pardon me and you let me finish my statement, you are presenting something about an area we don't know where is it, but we are talking about a position that we had an operation at. We did not publish the coordinate or the position, so I don't know how you can merge this information with what we are presenting at that time.
I appreciate your confusion. We'd hoped that showing you the pictures might provide some clarity. Let's look instead at the words uttered by the United Nations representative in Yemen, and I'll quote you: "Schools and hospitals and markets and enterprises and factories should not be stricken, should not be shelled." They have been, General. Even in warfare, there are certain rules and they are being violated in this conflict. Are you violating the rules of war, international law?
We confirm that we do not have any. Let me tell you something. Since day one of the operation, we had two political directives, and two restriction in our operation. First was does not having any operation in civilian area. Second is the infrastructures. So I do not find how your allegation going against the law.
Again,
if you go through,
forgive me for the lack of clarity. There are no allegations being made by us. This is a report upon comments made by a United Nations representative in Yemen, on the ground in Yemen, whereas you are presumably conducting affairs from Riyadh.
You are talking about Mr. Steve O'Brien, who when he visited
No, I'm talking about Johannes van der Klauw, who you just saw in that film then. I sense we're not making much progress here. Perhaps you could help me with something else. The British government won't tell us precisely what we've sold to you by way of weaponry in recent months, but we know that in the first 3 months of this year, some £17 million worth of Saudi money made its way into British arms company coffers. Do you know what you bought?
If you pardon me, if you ask me a question, let me finish my statement. Otherwise, I cannot comment in your questions.
Do you know what you bought for £17 million?
No, I'm talking about the question that you say that the United Nations say that the Saudi-led coalition go against the international law. We do not find this, but I know that the report talking about the two sides does not taking more caution in respecting the international law. But as we know that in our operation, we have always a communication with the people on the ground. We have very accurate intelligence. We use a very accurate precision weapons. So if there is a commission coming from the United Nations to investigate this allegation, we are very welcome to that committees.
Thank you very much indeed, General. Joining me now from Shrewsbury is the Conservative MP Daniel Kawczynski, a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and chair of the all-party parliamentary group on Saudi Arabia. Mr Kawczynski, last night the chairman of the committee upon which you sit, the Foreign Affairs Committee upon which you sit, called for some form of investigation. Crispin Blunt, we've now heard a senior member of Saudi military also call for an investigation into the possible commission of war crimes. And yet with Saudi Arabia, it often seems as if a different set of rules is being followed. Do you think any investigation will unfold, will occur?
Well, first of all, let me correct you. I'm not the chairman of the all-party group for Saudi Arabia. That's a Labour MP called Yasmin Qureshi. But I'm extremely concerned at the very one-sided, biased reporting of Newsnight of this extremely complicated war. And it seems that Newsnight and the BBC are determined to ignore the atrocities that the Houthi tribes have implemented in Yemen, the terrible brutality with which they have seized that country, the firing of mortars into Saudi Arabia itself from Yemen.
Let me help you. We're not in Saudi Arabia. Politicians don't get to determine what journalists are and are not allowed to do. Our investigation was conducted into the very simple question of whether weapons sold by British companies to Saudi Arabia had possibly been deployed in the commission of war crimes and the breach of international law. I think most people understood that, but I'm happy to clarify it for you. So I'll return, if I may, to the question that I asked you originally. Do you have much hope that a proper investigation will be launched into what has been happening in Yemen and what our films have displayed? The BBC, for the record, have also been in Aden and have also reported upon Houthi atrocities.
Well, I fundamentally dispute your coverage of the entire situation in Yemen, and you and Newsnight are trying to peddle a completely false prospectus to the British people of the situation on the ground.
Are we going to get close to appalling? Are we going to get close to answering the question I've asked about an investigation, Daniel Kawczynski?
This is a coalition. You keep referring to Saudi Arabia. This is a coalition of Gulf states. More than 10 countries are involved.
Yes, that's why we say a Saudi-led coalition. It includes Qatar, it includes Bahrain, it includes Egypt, it may include countries from Sudan. I would like you to begin. I'd like you to begin answering the question I've asked, which is: do you feel an investigation will ever happen?
Interrupting every time I want to answer the question.
Right. Here's the question for the final time: do you think there will be a a proper international investigation into the possible commission of war crimes by Saudi Arabia? You can take all the time in the world to answer that question, sir.
The war crimes are being perpetrated by the Houthi tribes, not by Saudi Arabia.
That bottling plant that you just saw footage of there had been bombed by airstrikes.
Well, you keep referring. You've sent a reporter
We've moved away
out
again
there
from
at
the question. Do you think there will be an investigation?
You know, you have an agenda at Newsnight, and you don't want anybody to dispute
Tell me what the agenda is.
The way in which you are covering this war.
What's the agenda?
You have an agenda against the Gulf States coalition. And you want to peddle a myth that only one side is responsible for atrocities.
No, we've just acknowledged that the Houthis are also responsible for atrocities. We've just listed other members of the coalition.
So why haven't you shown any coverage of the massacres
Because the investigation
and killing and
is into whether or not weapons sold by British companies have been used in the commission of war crimes possibly committed by Saudi Arabia. The Houthis are not our allies.
Are acting in a completely disgraceful way.
Remarkable encounter.
Over the coverage of this war. Absolutely disgraceful.
I feel guilty for keeping you from your home this evening. The Houthis are not our allies and they're not our customers. Therefore, the public interest of British journalism is not served at this point by investigating what they have or have not been doing. We sell weapons to
You are deliberately giving a very biased, one-sided opinion of this appalling, complicated war in Yemen, which 10 countries are acting upon. They are doing everything possible to limit civilian casualties, and yet you are trying to deliberately mislead the British people, and you are trying to cast some sort of aspersion on the United Kingdom.
Okay, and so are the United Nations.
Defence capability to Saudi Arabia.
So
and
are
I
the
think
United Nations, so are Médecins Sans Frontières, so are most of the human rights organisations and aid charities on the ground in that country. We're all pursuing a single-minded, biased agenda against Saudi Arabia and their coalition partners.
Newsnight's agenda is very different. I've been watching most of the day-to-day coverage from all sorts of news channels from around the world, and particularly from Al Jazeera and from Arab channels.
Yes.
And I can tell you that the coverage that they are giving of this war is very, very different to that of the BBC.
Well, that is what one would expect, perhaps, from a television station in part funded by one of the coalition partners. I will, more in hope than expectation, try one more time. Is there any chance of Saudi Arabia being exposed to the sort of scrutiny that almost every other country on the planet could expect if it was accused of what Saudi Arabia stands accused of tonight?
And I will answer for the upteenth time. The coalition forces of 10 countries are doing everything possible to limit civilian casualties, and the Newsnight are deliberately trying to falsify the situation on the ground in Yemen.
How?
Through your biased coverage.
No, how are we trying to falsify the situation on the ground? Are you suggesting the footage was doctored? Are you suggesting something has been made up? Or are we missing something here? Perhaps Al Jazeera have had some wonderful scoops that we've missed.
You've sent somebody. Well, you're not answering me. You're not allowing me to answer again.
You haven't even started to answer my first question.
You've sent a reporter out there at the licence fee expense who keeps referring to a bottling plant in the middle of a desert. And you say that you show all these plastic bottles full of water, and you say you found no evidence that it was used as a training centre. Well, of course you wouldn't find any evidence. Any evidence of nefarious purposes would have been disposed of or taken away before the BBC journalist turns up. It's an extremely biased reporting. And what I would say to your listeners is that they ought to look at the UN Security Council resolution on this and listen to coverage from around the world.
OK, let's try another tack.
The BBC are anti-Saudi,
yes,
but this
we've established
deliberate and provocative distortion of the fact
yes.
is wrong, because you are misleading the British people, and it's time that people stood up to the appalling bias of the BBC and the distortion and the untruths.
Absolutely, hidden agendas, all of this. Surely in those circumstances the case for a full and frank...
You wouldn't ever accept that, because the BBC is omnipotent, and such an important organisation never makes any mistakes, and it is supreme. Of course, that's right, yes.
And perhaps, if that were even close to the case, there would be an even more compelling case for an investigation. I think we stopped going round in circles hours ago. Daniel Kawczynski, many thanks indeed for your time.